Hello. Thank you so much for joining us today for Ask a Conservator Emergency Management. I am Gabriella Kahn from the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives Advancement Team, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our program. I want to gratefully acknowledge the Piscataway on whose ancestral homelands I live, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. I encourage everyone to learn more about the historic and current Native communities in the area that you call home through your local museums and centers, as well as the National Museum of the American Indian. And all of these organizations are working to preserve this crucial cultural heritage, which is the topic of our program this evening. So, disasters and emergencies of any kind, whether natural, due to climate change or human conflict, are tragedies, especially when they result in loss of life, shelter, and other basic needs. An aspect of these tragedies that the Smithsonian aims to prevent and address is the loss of knowledge, culture, history, art, or cultural heritage. So in January of 1865, the iconic Smithsonian Institution building, known as the Castle, actually erupted into flames, as you can see here. And this was potentially the first real internal disaster that the Smithsonian had to respond to, and was a very important moment in the history of the Smithsonian's libraries and archives. Not only did that fire destroy works of art, scientific specimens, records of the institution's early work, and James Smithson's personal papers and many of his books, but it also led to the Smithsonian's first secretary, Joseph Henry, negotiating to move the institution's library to the Library of Congress's newly constructed fireproof rooms, which was perhaps one of the first major acts of emergency preparedness at the Smithsonian. So throughout the years, library and archives conservators have often been at the forefront of cultural heritage emergency management and response, most notably during and following the 1966 flooding of the Arno River in Florence, Italy, which severely damaged hundreds of thousands of books at the National Library. So this disaster really brought global awareness and response to threats to cultural heritage, and was a foundational event in the development of the cultural heritage emergency management field. So our Smithsonian Libraries and Archives conservators build on that legacy, and they keep all of our staff focused on the safety of our collections, many of which are irreplaceable. And thanks to their skills and expertise, as well as support from our generous donors, our conservators protect, preserve, and care for these invaluable items. And they also often lend their skills and expertise in collaboration with partners addressing crises at home and around the world. So today we have two of our leaders at the Smithsonian in this field to tell you all about this. And of course, we'll have time at the end to have you all ask your own questions. So with that, I would like our speakers to introduce themselves. Katie, let's start with you.
Great. Thank you, Gabi. My name is Katie Wagner, and I'm a senior book conservator on the library side of Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. And I started my emergency management career in 1996 when I received my first training and responded to my first water emergency about 3 weeks later. Unfortunately, I also responded to my own emergency of the total loss of my home that same year. So I've been on both sides of these emergencies. In addition to the work, my conservation work and emergency management for the libraries, I serve internally on the Preparedness and Response and Collections Emergencies Team, PRICE, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. And I've served on missions externally, so abroad and within the United States or US territories with the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative.
Hi, I'm Nora Lockshin. I have, in addition to what Katie has said and how we share and cross over in some responsibilities at the Smithsonian, I have been dealing with library and cultural heritage emergencies for pretty much 25 years of my career, since I was a little baby pre-program, what we call pre-program conservator or conservator technician, when I was loading supplies for emergency carts and started attending courses with some of the folks who were fundamental to these emergency management skills that we have today. On a personal side, yeah, I've had some emergencies, household emergencies as well. And whether they be man-made or due to to infrastructure failure or a natural disaster, we all have experienced them, and so we all have some commonalities with that. So that's about it. I think I am very interested sort of with the scope of how long we've been at this game. Both Katie and I have seen the professionalization of emergency management emerge, and the collaboration, integration, and coordination of how gallery, what we call it the GLAM sector, galleries, libraries, and arts, how we respond to emergency management today.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Katie. So I have a question for you, Katie. So I touched a little on the history of emergency management at the Smithsonian, but can you tell us some more about how we got to where we are today and some of what emergency management preparedness and response entails both at the libraries and archives and also across the institution?
Sure. The first slide will help with this. At the libraries and archives, we do things like training, Mayday training, which we also do at the institutional level. And we do a lot of work with, we respond to small leaks. We have small emergencies, as you imagine, as the Smithsonian does every single day. Usually they're minor. But what really changed how we respond to emergencies at the Smithsonian were these 4 events you see listed here. And there's a slideshow of the images too. These events happened within a span of 2 years and just really highlighted that we needed to be able to pan-institutionally respond effectively to emergencies, and we were not able to do that. So as a result, 2 things happened. First, the Office of Emergency Management, led by sort of former FEMA staff members and former people who'd been in the military, so with a lot of emergency response experience, was formed. And together with that, and you're seeing here actually their Emergency Operations Center, where they physically sit when emergencies are occurring. Right now, we are in a state of emergency, and because we cannot be downtown, all these meetings take place virtually. The other thing that we started to do is a group called PRICE that I alluded to earlier was formed. And this is for collections-based emergencies. So PRICE is offering subject matter support and emergency response and recovery if a unit needs it, and just collaborating internally. So Sam Snell, third from left, is our leader. She's our permanent chair. And 6 staff members rotate in and out of these positions on 3 teams: logistics, policy and planning, and policy procedures and training. So this is actually not a 100% accurate photo, as we do not have a new photo given the pandemic, but it's close. There's 2 members who have switched out. This is the emergency response cycle. Some of you may be familiar with this. The first 3, the planning, mitigation, and training, they're really part of our day-to-day operational structure to enhance resilience in the event of emergency. These are things like the emergency carts that Nora talked about, and just having a disaster plan in place, things like that. Whereas response and recovery is sort of an as-needed activity to stabilize an incident and facilitate response and recovery activities. We do use the Federal Incident Command System, or ICS, and that allows us to respond across units and respond across different agencies if the police or fire department are involved in a response. We all use the same system. As part of PRICE, we conduct Mayday training, and we do this every year, except for last year. And it's a 2-day training. What you're seeing here on the left is object handling. And we're teaching people, staff members who might not have handled objects, because we're really trying to reach staff across the board at the Smithsonian, from directors and curators, conservation technicians, to to security guards. It's often that these emergencies happen after hours or in the weekends. And so it's really important that they are part of this team. So after this day of orientation and object handling, what we do is we do a mock drill with water. So we teach them how to actually respond and pull things out, and how those objects are different when they're wet. They're heavier, certain objects like paper become quite weak when they're wet, and so you have to know how to handle them. And this is a really unique training. I've only, prior to Price doing this, I had not taken part in a fire training since 1996 because they're difficult to arrange and there's very few facilities that can do this. This is a burn room at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF. And what is happening here is we've set up mocks, or some of these things are from thrift stores, or deaccession museum objects that we're putting through a fire salvage. That cabinet was also donated by a vendor, and that vendor is testing that cabinet to see how fire retardant it is. This training also gave us the opportunity to do some testing. So to test fire retardant enclosures that we use in collections management. And Nora did something with water and fire on optical discs. This is the salvage operation. So you're seeing some gloves and the helmets. We obviously did not put the fire out or start the fire. That was the ATF agents. We did wear, anybody who was actually going in to that room to salvage wore full personal protective equipment, Tyvek suits and respirators. But people who were just picking something up, we could have them wear less. Now you see somebody in an Army uniform. That is also an interesting story. That is Colonel Scott DeJesse, and he's leading up the cultural heritage preservation of the US Army. And he's working with Katie Wagner of SCRY that I talked about earlier to set that training up for soldiers so they're aware of cultural heritage when they go, when they're out in the field in areas that have sensitive archaeological digs, for example.
Thank you so much, Katie. I always love to hear about how our precious collections are cared for at the Smithsonian. And, I also really appreciate your emphasis on the planning and mitigation and training components of emergency management, in addition to actual response. And, I think we'll see how those continue to come up through all the examples that you and Nora are talking about today. And then, of course, another important theme that we'll hear about throughout that you also touched on is partnerships and collaborations. Thank you for sharing about the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative, or SCRY. Speaking of SCRY, Nora is going to tell us about the project that she and Katie and other colleagues worked on following the devastating earthquake in Haiti in 2010, which was really the birth of SCRY, and led to a more coordinated Smithsonian effort around both international and domestic cultural heritage emergency response.
Thanks for that, Gabi. So I'm going to take us back a little bit to the year 2010, when Haiti and much of the neighboring area suffered a devastating earthquake, that the likes of which had not been seen in a long time. And the entire world reached out to help, not just the Smithsonian, but because of the Smithsonian's unique nature and historic programs, we had a lot of relationships established with many cultural heritage stewards and living cultural tradition bearers through the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage and its Folkways program. So because of those established relationships, people were quick to reach out and establish connections on the ground and in both directions. And along with ICCROM and UNESCO, the Smithsonian and many other organizations, the Smithsonian mounted a response to see where we could help and where we could help in a unique way to give direct aid. So this was the beginning. On the left, you see a picture a little bit into the establishment for the staffing of a cultural recovery center for the Haitian community and cultural stewards all around, that being the people who work there, simply stated. The goal in that, there was an initial project for a couple of years to employ people, to have to create employment and allow people to start caretaking and having a sense of normality in their recovery. Not that it could be normal, but it allowed people to get back to work and feel that there was something to move forward towards, and kind of caring for cultural heritage. And that is, it can be an intangible loss as well as a tangible loss. So being able to surround themselves with moving forward with work and training and planning for the future was a huge part of that. So you can see on the right, that's from one of my work postings, where a whole team is working to recover materials that had been in the recovery zone, but they were still a little unprotected, vulnerable to the elements. And due to the donation of proper, good, strong boxes, we were able to get these things up off the floor and into more secured spaces so that they were less vulnerable to continued onslaughts of disrupted building infrastructure. Katie and her colleague Vanessa went down in the early assessment phase to assess the situation at the Bibliothèque Nationale de Haïti. And while they were going around looking at the various impacts to the building and actual artifacts, sometimes there would be time to actually just begin doing the training, because we were certainly there for short periods of time and wanted to leave folks with an ability to move forward. So you can see Katie here working on a wrapping and stabilization project, as I described for the archives, getting materials that were slightly unprotected into a stabilization stage where, well, one of those words that we used in the emergency life cycle, mitigation. Mitigation is providing protection against further destruction or potential threats. So there she is working with colleagues at the bibliothèque. And so, as I said, I had done the same with that work team at the Archives Nationales de Haïti, working on very important government documents, of course, and documents that provide the founding of people's birth records and stories and property and all these things that will be made, to keep them in continuing availability to the citizens. So while I was working on bigger teams and doing assessments on the building and the air conditioning and generator problems, and looking at ideas of potentially using passive airflow to continually cool the building during energy disruptions, things would happen like somebody, the workflow is going along perfectly normally, and then somebody finds something completely dissociated. So my colleague over here on the left had some training as a binder with the bindery, and he was asked to do some more special training. So there he was doing a specific wrapping of a fragmented object that was otherwise going to be lost into the, under the stacks possibly. So we were working on simple enclosures that they could do with the supply chain that we had at the time. And then, again, while we're working, somebody, as we're clearing, out of damaged areas, somebody found a painting. A painting is not the usual domain of the archives, but it had been there, and someone recognized the artist and the work and asked if I could do something about it. So there I am, stabilizing and mitigating further damage by doing a simple surface cleaning treatment with protection and very low suction vacuum through a screen, so I could remove some of those dust particles that could otherwise be absorbed into the what was an acrylic paint medium, and then providing more rigid storage and labeling it so people knew what it was and it wouldn't be at risk of being mistaken for something else. And that's about it. So coming more forward into time, the amount of work, the amazing amount of work and the amazing amount of coordination of colleagues within the Smithsonian, and also by having brought people in to help the Smithsonian's mounted response. As Gabi said, the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative was born. And so that office is now under the Office for International Relations and works on both a domestic and international level. And they are very great colleagues to us. One of the things that they support chiefly is what is called the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. And the Smithsonian supports what is, we call it HENTEF, which is a mouthful, but so is the whole title. HENTEF is based out of the Smithsonian, works with FEMA and up to 60 other organizations to support emergency response and recovery for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And so we have, on the domestic side, we have served in most often, the southeast corner of the continental United States, mostly because those areas have, as most of the audience will know, is often subject to being hit by hurricane and flooding and, and more. So we've had a lot of work down there. And this is an example of the kind of work that we have done. Further into a recovery phase, not necessarily during the active response phase where FEMA and first responders are focused on life safety and getting people shelter and getting networks and infrastructure back underway. A little bit further into the recovery phase, we might come down and help out in what's called a disaster recovery center that's open to the citizens of that area. And that in there, people come to those for all kinds of services, connection to medical, connection to shelter, loans, et cetera. But we also offer something to take care of spirit and home and personal memorabilia or treasures. There are very important things that people need to be able to take care of. For instance, a deed or birth certificates. We offer guidance on that. But we also answer questions about anything the public would like to ask about. Quilts, for instance, or precious textiles. I once advised a gentleman on what I believe was his great grandfather's hand-carved violin. And certainly in the musical environment near some of the areas that we were at, that really spoke a lot to local cultural heritage. So that's been some good times for people.
Thank you so much, Nora. Actually, as I was reading more about the Haiti Cultural Recovery Project, I saw this quote that it's from the project manager, Olsen Jean-Julien, that really stuck with me, especially as we're still enduring this pandemic. And he said, after trying to save people's lives, the next thing is to save people's reason for living. So, I think we all agree cultural collections are vital to the human experience. And, the Smithsonian is really committed to working with both partner organizations and individual people to, preserve them, it's great. So Nora, was just discussing the Smithsonian's partnership with FEMA, and Katie, you were deployed on a FEMA mission to the U.S. Virgin Islands following the 2017 hurricanes Irma and Maria. And then, thanks to Smithsonian support, you were able to continue that work and actually dedicate more time and resources to the recovery and then treatment of some really important and unique historical records. So can you tell us some more about that project?
Absolutely. It was a 2-week deployment and I didn't go alone. I went with Ashley Yaley, an objects conservator at the Smithsonian, and Preston Huff, so at the National Archives and Record Administration. And our job in that 2-week period was to assess 27 cultural, historical, and territorial government institutions to write reports that they could then use to hopefully fund projects. So the hurricanes, they were back-to-back Category 5 hurricanes were in September 2017, and we did not arrive until March. This picture here is of the Joint Field Office on St. Thomas, or JFO, and that is terminology from the Incident Command System. And Gabe Indochi was the person who arranged for all the site visits. You can see her in the white shirt right there. We worked on sites across all 3 islands. So St. John, St. Thomas, St. Croix. And the next photo shows various, So we have the Reichholz Center on the left, that's Ashley there. That's on St. Thomas, and then the battery at St. John, and then Fort Frederick on St. Croix. And this was also, Nora said, obviously we're not the only people responding to these things. Those boarded up windows were actually done, months prior to our visit by DEMA, which is the Danish Emergency Management Agency. And because US Virgin Islands used to be a colony of Denmark, they are still involved with things like this in case of emergency. So the challenges that arise are many. I call this one, nobody expects iguanas. We ran into juvenile iguanas in at least 3 or 4 sites. And basically it shocks you and shocks them to see them, but these are compromised sites. Some didn't have windows or roofs, and they are relatively harmless at this stage, but they get to be quite large. So you need to know how to handle them, and you also need to know what flora and fauna you're going to encounter in the location that you're sent to, basically. Mold is also a huge concern, and that is why we wear all of that personal protective equipment. So this is not stripy wallpaper. This is the Wim Estate, a sugar plantation that dates from the Danish period on St. Croix. And a lot of these places had just been shut up with no fresh air, no air circulation for 6 months. So we had to wear Tyvek suits. I wore a full face respirator with a carbon filter because of the odor. So particulate filter would have been enough, but really you need all of that. And just keep in mind, it's also very, very hot out. So hydration is very, very key on these missions. The other thing that we ran into, or we have to be wary of, is zoonotic illnesses. These are murals from an artist, a Crucian artist named Dove, and they are not covered in black paint. That is actually bat guano. There was a huge bat colony above our heads, and that's all bat guano on the ground as well. So we are checked over, to wear the respirators. We have a physical, and we are fit tested for them. And to travel, especially to islands and tropical locations, we are given the once over by Smithsonian physicians and given required inoculations. So this is the legislative archives of the US Virgin Islands on St. John. And these were 20 volumes of manuscripts that were unique, that covered the period 1909 through 1980, and were the only written records of these colonial councils, and went from the Danish period through the transition to US ownership in March of 1917. And they were soaking wet. So 6 months later, they were still dripping, and they were very, very moldy. You can see the purple mold, I believe, yes, in the next photo. And that happens after the mold spores activate. They can release dye. Sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's purple, sometimes it's a little more colorless. So this was a project where we felt strongly about it, and SCRI felt strongly about it. And so the libraries partnered with the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative to return. That is Katie Wagner, the head of SCRI, and that is Senator Myron Jackson of the US Virgin Islands legislature. And he really was instrumental in organizing this through ties he had to the Smithsonian from the Folklife Festival that he had participated in, I think in the 80s or 70s perhaps. So we went back. That is paperwork that's being signed so we could remove those volumes from the island. We did have to reassess them because I had been there in March, but it was now July. So we wanted to sort of take more photos and document them. And then we packed them up, and we had to move them off island because there was just nowhere on the islands that could treat these volumes. So they were actually shipped to a freeze drying facility in Texas. And that huge gray thing there that looks like shipping container is actually a freeze dryer, a vacuum freeze dryer. And a vacuum freeze dryer, unlike regular freezing, will inactivate the mold, not eradicate it, but it will get rid of all of that moisture within about a 2-week period. And it also lessens distortion. Freezing can distort a binding, and this sublimates the water straight into gas form. So after that 2-week period, I went back with about 6 staff members, and we quality controlled them. And due to the nature of these volumes, we actually carried this back as our hand-checked luggage to the Smithsonian, where the book conservation lab started to treat them with the help of Sarah Nielsen. Sarah was great. She was a student then at the Royal Danish Academy of Conservation in Copenhagen, and was a library's 50th anniversary internship. At that time, it was our anniversary. And we're working together here to come up with a very thin Japanese paper that we could use as a remoistenable tissue. We're trying to add as little stress to these volumes as possible when we stabilize them, to rebind them and to digitize them. And really, everybody in the lab helped out. Our technicians, Kayla Richard and Don Stankiewicz, our volunteer Bruce, who you see at the bottom left, Ashley Yaley, who served on that original mission with me, came in. And we spent about, the whole project from start to finish took about 2 years and was finished literally right before the pandemic. We were supposed to return the volumes, but we could not. David Holbert led our digitization team and digitized 7,376 pages of these documents. And these, we have given them a hard copy over to the legislature that they can eventually put on a website. So researchers can access this without having to, deal with that original, really, really fragile item. Even though we repaired it, they remain fragile.
Thanks, Katie. There was so much work that went into preserving those documents, and I know that you are eager to make sure that they get home safely. So hopefully that will be able to happen relatively soon. So Nora, you also responded to Hurricanes Irma and Maria, but in a different location in Puerto Rico. Can you tell us about that experience and some of what has come out of it?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, in a widespread event like a hurricane that, and namely 2 hurricanes, there were more, but those were the big ones. If you cast your minds back, you'll recall that Puerto Rico, the islands in Puerto Rico were extremely devastated with direct impact at the full height of the storm, which knocked out and devastated the island's infrastructure, and of course had much worse effects among the people and difficulties that they've had there. But even coming out of it, locals on the ground with a collapsed infrastructure were going pretty much once they established, once the storm had passed, they started establishing connection and trying to find out how people were, and that is on a personal level as well as an institutional level. So the professionals who were able to make connections and raise signals, whether that was a cell phone that happened to be working on the last power they had, or actually going door to door and looking for people, they managed to establish a network between them all, which helped find out what the status was where, and news reports started coming in. Since news reports were slow and personal, it gave the rest of the world a little bit of time to figure out how we could possibly help. And so under the Department of Interior with HENTEF, as I described before, we started planning a joint response. So the Smithsonian, along with the National Archives and Records Administration, Library of Congress, National Park Service, and even colleagues from NASA and other agencies were tapped to come together as for what we call a surge force in the recovery stage. So we were able to plan through those connections what we thought we could get done. And in fact, it turned into a 2-phase, I think I argued most strongly for a 2-phase mission, in that we would go down, do assessments, and then gather and then figure out where we could do the most and be the most effective. So when we went down, we ended up in something like a joint field operations center, as Katie described, We worked closely with the SHPO, which is generally the State Historic Preservation Officer, and colleagues to create a map. And you see a map of not all, but up to 15, like plus 20 more probably down the road, of cultural heritage sites, libraries, museums, small collections, archaeological sites, the National Guard, where the National Guard had stored certain collections of historic value. And so we went around the island to visit multiple areas. But for the most part, while others were working with other agencies, for instance, sculptures and paintings or archaeological sites, my home base was pretty much the Archivo General y Biblioteca Nacional de Puerto Rico. And what you see here is a lovely, airy looking, beautifully built out room in a historic building. And that's lovely, but that is the historic part. A couple decades earlier, this building had been restored with the best of preservation in mind, which included putting in forced air, HVAC, and climate control, and sealing up a lot of the windows that brought natural aeration and breezes through the building. And that was with the best of intentions in mind. However, when you are 6 months into a power loss, those places stay dark and get pretty steamy and support mold growth. So as you can see on the upper left, we spent a lot of time in the stacks in the dark with headlamps trying to figure out what was going on in there in compromised areas. And so moving forward, we also took advantage of the time in the area locations to sort of come out of these really hot, dense areas to actually do trainings. And those are colleagues from the National Archives showing folks how to do minimal stabilization for books that were somewhat less effective. But again, that mitigation step, things that they could do with collections on site with the minimal materials and supply chain, that was there and possible. There we're working by daylight in a breezy corridor. And that was helpful to moving forward. So looking towards the future, I want to focus on the fact that sometimes we can continue these collaborations. The first 2 times I went down to Puerto Rico, it was on the FEMA mission assignment or deployment. And then moving forward, the Smithsonian is able to partner with other groups to support ongoing training. So with that network of Puerto Ricans who had created the Alianza Cultural por Emergencias de Puerto Rico, they're working to train cultural stewards and emerging conservators as well through universities and online programs, so that emergency management can be part of their focus. It's no longer, oh dear, wait for the conservators to come. It's now we're all part of this and we can prepare and plan and mitigate. So the work is ongoing.
Thank you, Nora. I love that. Yeah, and I'm sure everyone noticed that was a Zoom screenshot. So it's great to see that you've been able to continue this important work despite the pandemic, and just really exciting that the Smithsonian has been able to support these efforts to train people in the care of their own collections, and to build this next generation of conservators around the world. So speaking of continued collaborations and building capacity, Katie, your most recent mission was to the Bahamas after Hurricane Dorian in the fall of 2019. And I know that plans were disrupted due to the pandemic, but an important aspect of that mission when you're able to return will be training. So can you tell us more about that mission and some of those unique challenges you faced, as well as your plans when you're able to return?
Absolutely, Gabby. So the Bahamas mission was also after a hurricane, Category 5 hurricane, Dorian, which was in September of 2019. And this is a mission where we went in really soon after that. So we were there by October 28th, that was still the recovery phase. So a lot of the challenges we faced were that the infrastructure, it was a little difficult to get around. This was the airport on the Abaco Islands. Luckily, we were able to base ourselves on Nassau, but unlike the US Virgin Islands, the Bahamas are a chain of 700 islands, 30 are inhabitable. So It is spread across 500 miles. We had to travel great distances using a variety of, we say planes, trains, and automobiles. Really, it was golf carts and ships, airplanes, cars. The roads were really rough. There was a lot of debris still on the roads, boats that had just been lifted from the sea and inland, or these it was an overturned tanker truck. We had to travel by boat, and sometimes the docks where we had to land weren't quite stable. So we just had to be really, really careful when we were on this mission. These are different types of sites we visited in an area called Hopetown on Elbow Key. So this was in the Abaco chain. And this is actually an interesting story because it dates from the Revolutionary War period, when the British soldiers who had lost were often given land grants on this island. This is the post office, obviously structural damage to the roof. And the next slide shows the Loyal Sculpture Garden and a lighthouse. We are trained to respond to a variety of different emergencies, and everybody who's on the team, this is Richard Curran, Ambassador at Large at the Smithsonian, and Katie Wagner, head of SCRI, with Becca Kennedy, one of our collections management experts in disaster recovery, and everybody's pitching in. You know, Richard, even though he is much higher up, obviously, than me at the Smithsonian, and Corey as well, they are hands-on doing the salvage work. And there is a real difference between salvage and conservation work. We're not doing conservation work here. We're trying to stabilize things so that later we can be followed. Somebody who's a conservator can hopefully come to the islands and repair things. This was one of her success stories. This is the Wayney Malone Museum. She was a Revolutionary War widow, and the museum reflects sort of her family's history on the island. The water reached to right below those piano keys, and unfortunately saturated some manuscripts that were her original diaries and manuscripts, you know, that were original to the Revolutionary War period. And luckily, even though there was absolutely no electricity on the island, there was a generator, and we were able to locate space in a freezer and freeze those records. And that bought enough time for the people who work at the museum to contact conservators in Miami and to fly that material down to be treated. So that was a great success story. Our goal, as you said, we were supposed to return in July of 2020. SCRI was going to sponsor, and still will eventually, hands-on training for locals, because our goal isn't always to rush in and help, it's to make people able to help themselves next time around. And this is Stacy Bowe of SCRI conducting similar training that we did in the US Virgin Islands after we had done that initial mission. So that is ultimately the goal, is the empowerment for other people. Nora and I just really wanted to thank SCRI and FEMA and our colleagues at home and abroad who's really supported us in these missions.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, there are so many people who are involved in these activities and these missions, and yeah, so many people to thank. So we have already a number of questions, and I'm sure we'll get plenty more. So I'm going to open it up and ask again, if anyone does have any questions, please go ahead and submit them using the Q&A feature. So one of our first questions is about maybe your sort of educational background. So do emergency response personnel take standard college level courses, and can someone earn a degree in this field?
Usually it's, do you want me to take this, Nora? We can both pitch in this. Usually it is not a degree program per se. It's training through, for example, the American Institute for Conservation offers workshops, or it can be part of a program training. That's how Nora, I believe, learned her initial emergency management skills. So it's a combination, I would say, but there's not really a degree for conservators or collections managers in this.
Let's see. I again think that there is, within the conservator track now, there's a specialization called preventive conservation. And so folks in that track, and that's been established since Katie and I did our, what do you call, not final studies, because there's always continuing education, terminal degrees, right? That's what they say. So there's a lot of focus on that. And then there are, of course, professionalizations in emergency management. I think you can look for something called, certainly FEMA's Emergency Management Institute also offers free courses that almost anyone can take. There are at least basics of the incident command system, where you learn a little bit more how you work with governments and first responders, and really how things go down when there needs to be an area-wide response. And those are actually advocated for the citizenry. In some areas, there are states or local areas often have an office of readiness. In DC, there's Ready DC, for example, and New York has one. And they actually motivate and encourage citizens to take part in preparedness. And as part of that, they ask that you train through the Emergency Management Institute. And those are free.
Great, thank you. Another question, how do you decide which disaster areas to go to physically to help out? Or are you chosen by certain agencies to go to those places?
We are not on, personally, Nora and I are not on the decision-making process for that. People like Katie Wagner of SCRI decide, and then ask different conservators around the Smithsonian to help. And it just happens that Nora and I have been able to respond to several missions. But it's based on need. And I see a question here about the fire in Cape Town, South Africa. They did reach out to Corey and the Smithsonian, and I know she and I were in contact with Ujala Satgur, the head of that library, mostly offering advice. Obviously, federal employees can't travel right now. So in conjunction with the Library of Congress, we do offer advice remotely. It isn't always going physically to a place, and that has value too.
Yeah, I would say sometimes you're looking for the best match of skill set to the need. So when it tends to be a governmental or a FEMA type response, we are tending to respond to support agencies of state that are needed for the state or country or territory to function. So that's one reason why we tend to focus on the National Library and the National Archives that are of service. But then again, we can often, with other funding, help out other areas as far as that's concerned. Sometimes language as well. Having languages helps. It was easier for me to pick up some parts of Haitian Creole than I would have thought. I did a lot of preparation for that, and I wasn't speaking that the whole time, but having multiple languages did help in understanding, in compassion, in understanding how the cultural works, and not just coming in as I'm going to do it this way, my way. So that was very useful in both situations that I've been at. And I will add that I actually had to tap out of Bahamas due to personal reasons. So sometimes there are physical conflicts or family conflicts that just make it impossible for someone to go. Otherwise, we might spend a lot more of our time going and going and going.
I'm sure. So an interesting question, which also mentions the fire in South Africa and Cape Town. So a number of galleries, libraries, archives, and museums that have experienced devastating losses seem to be engaged in forms of what I think of as post-disaster crowdsourcing. So soliciting user content like notes, transcriptions, and reading room images. I wonder if one of the recommendations for planning and mitigation is to engage in digitization and crowdsourcing as part of normal business. The Smithsonian is a leader in crowdsourced transcription, for example. Is the Smithsonian Transcription Center and resulting data part of your official mitigation plan?
Well, I would say it's not part of the official mitigation plan. The amount of content that we have at the Smithsonian to digitize and describe is enormous. I mean, we barely scratch the surface. We focus on mission, I won't go into Smithsonian language, its own dialect. but we have a lot of prioritizations, and sometimes the prioritizations of what we work on does change based on events or things that are of strategic importance. And I have to say this year has been extraordinary for the deeper description and reevaluation of what we have online. I mean, you know, it used to be just scan it and get it up there, and now it's also making pathways to finding it. And a lot of people have been working really hard in the background, not on site, to increase the findability of these collections and not just have random, you know, bits of digitized paper everywhere. When we get back on site, we'll see how it goes. Certainly our digital infrastructure also has its own disaster plan to make sure that we can sustain these digital assets online.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think our other archives colleagues would definitely want us to throw out there that digital preservation is also a whole field and an important thing to consider as well. So another question, big question, how does the impact of climate change factor into emergency planning?
It definitely to it because it's happening. These Category 5 hurricanes are happening much more often than they did in the past, and that is a direct result of climate change. And so, yes, it's a problem that is climate-based.
Yeah. And that influences strategic priorities, like really mapping your buildings near low-lying areas, knowing where you are on the 100-year FEMA plan, and reconsidering that as well. You know, a lot of folks are considering where they keep things, how they store them, and how they describe them based on the known threats. And the thing is, as Katie said, you know, known threats is oncoming water, and that can happen from a burst pipe, or it can happen from a flood, or it can happen from a 100-year flood that happens in 5 years' time. So that's part of the prioritization of our daily work, is working to mitigate those issues.
And I would say the major thing we see damaged are items that were stored on the floor and became wet as a result. So that would be my big piece of advice. Do not store anything in your basement on the floor, and don't use tape, pressure sensitive tape.
Those are some good tips. This is a good question. I hadn't even really thought about. How do conservators during an emergency response deal with maybe conflicting opinions on what to preserve or save in a time-sensitive situation? Is it already predetermined? And also, you know, how does the same concept apply with conflicting opinions with other stakeholders who are not part of the response team?
I would say personally that I have never run into a situation where there is really a conflict. It's a collaborative process, and you sort of come to a decision about how to treat something. Maybe Nora's had a different experience, but it's always been pretty easy to come to an agreement on what to do in these situations.
Yeah, certainly there are groups that have known priorities established. And as I discussed before, mitigation, if you know that there's a certain corner of the building that often springs a leak or is the low-lying area that's likely to take on water, you know, the prioritization is, let's move that. Let's not store it there. And then you're starting to mitigate by getting it out of harm's way. That's for a known issue, right? But with tornadoes, with hurricanes, we can plan and we can prepare and we can, you know, withdraw and put things on high ground, which is the case for a lot of our friends in the National Park Service who have low-lying and barrier island and coastal historic sites. Some have retreat plans, so they have prioritized objects. And, you know, if they know a hurricane has a 50% likelihood or 70% or 90% in the coming days, they start moving stuff. But you don't always know where it's going to hit. So you can prioritize all you want, but it, you know, where a fire might break out may not be where you prioritized items. So when you're in the field and doing a response, you have to deal with the situation you've got and the information from the subject matter experts that you have ideally lined up beforehand in your emergency contact plans, so that you could have people weighing in with some authority, and we're comfortable in making those calls. And as a very good friend of ours, who's also well known in emergency management, Andrew Robb over at Library of Congress, I'm calling your name. He said once in a forum, and to me, you do the best you can with the information and resources that you've got, and you have to be comfortable working and making decisions and moving forward.
Yeah, I'm sure. Another question here. How do emergency plans vary by the type of museum at the Smithsonian?
Well, we have, in addition to our precious documents and films and videotapes and historic and our amazing books and manuscripts, we have living collections at the Smithsonian. We have animals in the zoo, we have gardens. We also have people in our museums and staff and visitors. And so the emergency plans that our Office of Emergency Management significantly differ from ours. And that's why we come in to help them. That's why they can tap us if it's, once they've cleared the building, once, first responders have gotten on site, then they come to us, right? But so you could say there are significant differences based on the collection.
I think we all agree, though, that human life is number one, and that we all agree on, and that is our major concern, is safety and human life.
Yeah, we don't go rushing in until they tell us it's clear. We never go rushing in, actually, ideally.
Yeah, well, we certainly hope that it doesn't, that situation never comes to be. So we are actually right at 6 p.m. and unfortunately that is the end of our program. And I will just say, I certainly learned a lot today, and I hope everyone else did too. But before we go, I just want to express our gratitude to all of you who joined us today. Our supporters, our colleagues, our friends. We can't do what we do without you. And your support enables us to, keep cultural heritage both surviving and also thriving for now and for future generations. So thank you. And, as you have heard throughout this program, it's really because of supporters like you that conservators have been able to protect cultural heritage and respond in times of disaster, both at home and around the world. So again, we're so grateful. So if you have any further questions or comments or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach our advancement team at sla-rsvp@si.edu. And I know we did have some questions that we weren't able to get to. So, we will try to follow up about some of those in particular if we can. And you can also share your thoughts by filling out our short survey after the session ends. And just thank you again so much for joining us today. And we hope you stay safe and healthy and have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.